Welcome to the Scrum Guide, the definitive guide to Scrum, the rules of the game, part 4. In the last episode, we started off with the daily Scrum. Let's move on to part 2 of the daily Scrum. Before we get into it, I want to make you aware that this Scrum Guide was developed and sustained by the Scrum creators, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland. You can get a copy of the Scrum Guide for free at scrumguides.org. Let's continue with the daily Scrum. The structure of the meeting is set by the development team and can be conducted in different ways if it focuses on progress towards the sprint goal. Some development teams will use questions. Some will be more discussion-based. Here's an example of what might be used. What did I do yesterday that helped the development team meet the sprint goal? What will I do today to help the development team meet the sprint goal? Do I see any impediment that prevents me or the development team from meeting the sprint goal? The development team or team members often meet immediately after the daily Scrum for detailed discussions or to adapt or replan the rest of the sprint's work. The Scrum Master ensures that the development team has the meeting, but the development team is responsible for conducting the daily Scrum. The Scrum Master teaches the development team to keep the daily Scrum within the 15-minute time box. The daily Scrum is an internal meeting for the development team. If others are present, the Scrum Master ensures that they do not disrupt the meeting. Daily Scrums improve communications, eliminate other meetings, identify impediments to development for removal, highlight and promote quick decision-making, and improve the development team's level of knowledge. This is a key inspect and adapt meeting. Sprint review. A sprint review is held at the end of the sprint to inspect the increment and adapt the product backlog if needed. During the sprint review, the Scrum team and stakeholders collaborate about what was done in the sprint. Based on that and any changes to the product backlog during the sprint, attendees collaborate on the next things that could be done to optimize value. This is an informal meeting, not a status meeting, and the presentation of the increment is intended to elicit feedback and foster collaboration. This is at most a 4-hour meeting for 1-month sprints. For shorter sprints, the event is usually shorter. The Scrum Master ensures that the event takes place and that the attendees understand its purpose. The Scrum Master teaches everyone involved to keep it within the time box. The sprint review includes the following elements. Attendees include the Scrum team and key stakeholders invited by the product owner. The product owner explains what product backlog items have been done and what has not been done. The development team discusses what went well during the sprint, what problems it ran into, and how those problems were solved. The development team demonstrates the work that it has done and answers questions about the increment. The product owner discusses the product backlog as it stands. He or she projects likely target and delivery dates based on progress to date if needed. The entire group collaborates on what to do next so that the sprint review provides valuable input to subsequent sprint planning. Review of how the marketplace or potential use of the product might have changed, what is most valuable to do next, and a review of the timeline, budget, potential capabilities, and marketplace for the next anticipated releases of functionality or capability of the product. The result of the sprint review is a revised product backlog that defines the probable product backlog items for the next sprint. The product backlog may also be adjusted overall to meet new opportunities. Sprint retrospective. The sprint retrospective is an opportunity for the Scrum team to inspect itself and create a plan for improvements to be enacted during the next sprint. The sprint retrospective occurs after the sprint review and prior to the next sprint planning. This is at most a 3-hour meeting for 1-month sprints. For shorter sprints, the event is usually shorter. The Scrum Master ensures that the event takes place and that attendants understand its purpose. The Scrum Master ensures that the meeting is positive and productive. The Scrum Master teaches all to keep it within the time box. The Scrum Master participates as a peer team member in the meeting from the accountability over the Scrum process. The purpose of the sprint retrospective is to inspect how the last sprint went with regards to people, relationships, process, and tools. Identify and order the major items that went well and potential improvements, and create a plan for implementing improvements to the way the Scrum team does its work. The Scrum Master encourages the Scrum team to improve within the Scrum process framework, its development process and practices to make it more effective and enjoyable for the next sprint. During each sprint retrospective, the Scrum team plans ways to increase product quality by improving work processes or adapting the definition of done, if appropriate and not in conflict with product or organizational standards. By the end of the retrospective, the Scrum team should have identified improvements that it will implement in the next sprint. Implementing these improvements in the next sprint is the adaptation to the inspection of the Scrum team itself. Although improvements may be implemented at any time, the sprint retrospective provides a formal opportunity to focus on inspection and adaptation. Scrum Artifacts. Scrum's artifacts represent work or value to provide transparency and opportunities for inspection and adaptation. Artifacts defined by Scrum are specifically designed to maximize transparency of key information so that everybody has the same understanding of the artifact. Product Backlog. The product backlog is an ordered list of everything that is known to be needed in the product. It is the single source of requirements for any changes to be made to the product. The product owner is responsible for the product backlog, including its content, availability, and ordering. A product backlog is never complete. The earliest development of it lays out the initially known and best understood requirements. The product backlog evolves as the product and the environment in which it will be used evolves. The product backlog is dynamic. It constantly changes to identify what the product needs to be appropriate, competitive, and useful. If a product exists, its product backlog also exists. The product backlog lists all features, functions, requirements, enhancements, and fixes that constitute the changes to be made to the product in future releases. The product backlog items have the attributes of a description, order, estimate, and value. Product backlog items often include test descriptions that will prove its completeness when done. As a product is used and gains value, the marketplace provides feedback. The product backlog becomes larger and more exhaustive. Requirements never stop changing, so a product backlog is a living artifact. Changes in business requirements, market conditions, or technology may cause changes in the product backlog. Still on the product backlog refinement is the act of adding detail, estimates, and order to items in the product backlog. This is an ongoing process in which the product owner and development team collaborate on the details of product backlog items. During product backlog refinement, items are reviewed and revised. The Scrum team decides how and when refinement is done. Refinement usually consumes no more than 10% of the capacity of the development team. However, product backlog items can be updated at any time by the product owner or at the product owner's discretion. Still on the product backlog, higher ordered product backlog items are usually clearer and more detailed than lower ordered ones. More precise estimates are made based on the greater clarity and increased detail. The lower the order, the less detail. Product backlog items that will occupy the development team for the upcoming sprint are refined so that any one item can reasonably be done within the sprint time box. Product backlog items that can be done by the development team within one sprint are deemed ready for selection in a sprint planning. Product backlog items usually acquire this degree of transparency through the above described refining activities. The development team is responsible for all estimates. The product owner may influence the development team by helping it understand and select trade-offs, but the people who will perform the work make the final estimate. And that concludes our review of Part 4 in the Scrum Guide, the definitive guide to Scrum, the rules of the game.